Hello, film fans. In continuing my review of 1970s quote-unquote dystopian science fiction movies, we come to one of my favorites, although it's a bit contentious amongst fans, and that's 1973's Soylent Green, starring Charlton Heston, Edward G. Robinson in his last film role, Brock Peters, Joseph Cotton, Leigh Taylor Young, and Tab Hunter. And it's a movie that's based loosely on Harry Harrison's 1966 novel Make Room, which is about overpopulation, overcrowding, depletion of Earth's resources, and poor treatment of the elderly, and some of the other issues of the day, hoarding of resources by rich people and poor people starving. Some of those themes carry over into the movie, but not all of them. The movie was directed by Richard Fleischer, who also directed such things, diverse movies as The Narrow Margin, which is one of my favorite film noirs, 1947. Directed Tora Tora Tora, about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Directed Fantastic Voyage, 1966, another great science fiction movie with Raquel Welch. Also did Conan the Destroyer and Red Sonja, both of which I enjoyed, although admittedly Conan the Destroyer is not a very good movie. And a host of other movies. I can't, list them. There's so many. Worked with some of the greatest Hollywood stars of all. So a really top-notch director. It was written by Stanley R. Greenberg, who is also a science fiction writer based on Harry Harrison's script. It won both a Nebula and a Saturn Award, and a Grand Prix also, and it was nominated for a couple of other awards. It was not terribly well received by critics. Roger Ebert thought it was silly. Gene Siskel gave it a bad review. Vince Canby kind of liked it, the New York Times, and there were some other positive reviews. Unfortunately, it's sort of become tainted by its signature line, Soylent Green is made out of people. But that doesn't really ruin the movie in my perspective. If you haven't seen it, it's still worth watching. It stars Charlton Heston as a police detective named Andy Thorne. In the book, he's called Andy Rush, but in the movie, he's called Andy Thorne, and he lives in a cramped little apartment with his partner, Solomon Roth, who's played by Edward G. Robinson. And he's a quote-unquote police book. He's a detective who looks for information. He's not an active beat cop like Thorne is. Thorne is called in. There's a riot when some supplies of this stuff called Soylent Green, which is allegedly made of plankton, runs out, and people start rioting and beating each other up, and the cops come in, and they have these big scoops, which are basically dump trucks with a snowplow on the front, and they literally shovel people into the back, and then they're going to take them off to jail. People are so poor that they live in stairwells, they live on the street, they live anywhere they can basically find a place to flop down and sleep. And there's a murder that takes place. An assassin breaks into the apartment of a corporate executive played by Joseph Cotton, and there's kind of an interesting existential scene where the assassin actually asks, he's been given a crowbar by Tab Hunter to kill this man with his weapons are illegal, and he climbs over the wall with this crowbar, and he's going to bash his head in with it. And Joseph Cotton says something like, I knew this was going to happen because of the report I made. And the killer says, so this is right? And Cotton says, no, it's not right, but it's necessary. And then he kills him. And I thought that was kind of an interesting plot twist in there. Unfortunately, we don't really see the killer again. It's different from the book. Has a similar plot in which a young kid named Billy steals some quote-unquote Soylent steaks. And in the book, Soylent means soy and lentils. The steaks are made out of soy and lentils, hence Soylent. There is no such thing as Soylent Green or red or yellow as in the movie. But again, the kid accidentally kills the executive in the book. He also discovers that he has a very beautiful mistress named Cheryl, who is played by Leigh Taylor Young, and that he has a lot of valuable things in his apartment. So he rigs the apartment so he can break back in later. The owner of the apartment is not a corporate executive in the book. He's a gangster. And by killing this gangster accidentally, this kid Billy gets himself in a lot of trouble because now he's being pursued by gangsters and he has to run away from New York and hide out in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and then they track him down there, and he's hiding out with his friend Pete, and he has to live in a car, and then they're chased all over the place, and eventually he's tracked down by Thorne and accidentally killed. That's one of the plots of the book. The book is also about elderly people being mistreated, and they're rising up, and people want population control, and even Andy Rush joins that protest. It ends on a sort of a down note where after he's killed Billy, he goes to Times Square to the New York, to the New Year's Eve celebration, and the famous billboard posts that the U.S. population is now over 344 million. How are they going to feed all these people? They don't really say. In the movie, Andy Thorne is called in by his captain, played by Brock Peters, and told to investigate this murder of the Joseph Cotton character. So he goes to his apartment, he finds Cheryl, who is quote-unquote furniture, meaning that she comes with the apartment. She'll go to whoever owns the apartment, gets her as basically a prostitute. And he starts to fall in love with her because, again, she's very beautiful. And she tells him that, the apartment has rare things like running hot water. And he takes a shower and he's just like almost crying at, how rare that is. And they have real soap and real food like strawberries, which cost $100 an ounce in the outside world, and steak and some green onions. And he takes these back to Saul, to his apartment. And Saul starts crying when he looks at the steak. And he says, I'm going to make you something really good when you come back with this. And he continues to investigate the murder, and he's suddenly being sort of obfuscated, running into roadblocks, and he can't really find out much about who this executive was or why he was killed. And Tab Hunter's character, I can't remember what his name is in the movie, is sort of like trying to get him and misses, killing him by a couple of times. He goes back and he interrogates Cheryl and a couple of the other quote-unquote furniture girls, and they can't really tell him very much either. But he asks Saul to look into this for him, and he goes to the what's called the Exchange, which is where all the books are kept now, and it's run by Celia Lovsky, who many people remember as T'Pau on Star Trek, the rather formidable leader of Vulcan in Amok Time. It was arguably one of the best episodes. She's very good in this movie. Also, as the head of the Exchange, again, she doesn't really tell very much to Saul. She just directs him to the Soylent Oceanographic Study. I should admit, in the movie, Soylent is supposedly made out of plankton, out of the oceans. That's what they tell the people anyway. So he's researching these things and finds out basically that it's a lie. The oceans are dying and there is no more plankton. And he discovers the secret of Soylent Green, but it's so horrible that he can't even tell Andy about it. Instead, he decides to, quote-unquote, go home, which is a euphemism for voluntary euthanasia. He goes into a euthanasia center, and they feed him basically a drugged, poisoned cocktail, ask him what his favorite color is, and he tells them orange, and they say, what kind of music do you like? He says, light classical music, and they put him in the room, and they're playing Grieg and Mozart and Tchaikovsky and Beethoven, and show him these beautiful images of what the earth used to be like, with green fields and running water and mountains and deer playing in meadows and butterflies, and he's just taken aback, by how beautiful it all is. And Thorne comes to visit him, and there's a brief period where he's allowed to talk to him. He says, "Why did you do this, Saul? What made you do this?" And all he tells him is, Soylent, terrible, can't believe it. And he's basically consumed by the drugs, and he dies. For some reason, Thorne decides that he's going to follow the body out of the euthanasia center. And he does so. It's picked up by basically a garbage truck and dumped in with other bodies. And he hides on the roof of one of these trucks and is taken to what's basically a factory. And he wonders what's going on in the factory. All the bodies are put on a conveyor belt, and these conveyor belts are automated. There's no humans in there at all. And he climbs onto the conveyor belt, and he's dragged along with these bodies, and then he sees that at the end of the conveyor belt are Soylent Green crackers. And he's like, oh my God, they're turning corpses into food, basically. He goes back to the city, and even though he's thwarted by some detectives who are trying to kill him, Tab Hunter's still trying to kill him, eventually he shoots him, and he is shot as well, and he ends up in a downtown mission or a church, and he's trying to talk to the priest. He can't get to him; it's so overcrowded, and he's taken away by police. Obviously, Brock Peters finked on him, and he's dying anyway. But he yells out the famous line, you have to stop him. It's Soylent Green. Soylent Green is made out of people, and that's the end of the movie. I think it was very good. It pointed up a lot of the problems at the time, which seemed like they would become bigger than they actually did. But, overpopulation, pollution, depletion of resources, unemployment, getting big mistreatment of elderly people, basically the world going into decay. I think it's a good example of dystopian science fiction. Also, Charlton Heston does a very good acting job in this one. He underplays his character, if anything. He's not being a big, boisterous, loudmouth like he is in The Omega Man or even in Planet of the Apes. He's just this kind of humble police detective who's trying to do his job. And he does a very good acting job in that. I still highly recommend the film. As I said, it's not really ruined by its famous tagline.